Hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Hogan, and today I'm going to be telling you about traditional Nigerian clothing and Nigerian art. So, first, we're going to start off learning a little bit about traditional women's clothing in Nigeria. Just a note to start, there are several tribes in Nigeria, such as the Yoruba and Igbo people, and each of these tribes have a few different pieces of clothing than the typical Nigerian attire. However, the majority of women and men do dress similarly, but that is a note to make, as these tribes do have a few different types of clothing. But we're just going to talk about the general clothing right now. So, the first typical piece of attire that women wear in Nigeria consists of a buba. I hope I pronounced that right, I don't know, which is a loose blouse that drops below the waist. Then there's the Euro, which is a rectangular cloth that is wrapped around the waist. So in the bottom right picture, you can kind of see those first two pieces of clothing. The Euro looks like a little bit like an apron to me, if you can pick that out. And then the buba is obviously just kind of like a shirt. Then we have the gilet, which is a rectangular cloth that can be wrapped around the head in several ways. In both these pictures, we can see the gilet, but they are wrapped in different ways. So the bottom right picture is more of a traditional wrapping job, or whatever you want to call it, that women would wear day to day, whereas the top left picture is actually what a woman would wear to her wedding ceremony. So it's a little bit more fancy. Then there's the Igbo run, which is a scarf around the neck or to be laid diagonally across the shoulder. We can see this in the woman in the top left. She has that laid across her shoulder. Then the last piece of clothing that women typically wear is the kaba, which is a single piece dress. There's not really a picture of this. Sometimes women wear it and then they wear their euro over top of that. So that may be what the women in the bottom right picture are wearing. It's hard to tell, but theirs do look like it consists of a buba and then a kaba on the bottom. So for traditional men's clothing, it's somewhat similar to women's clothing. It's pretty simple though. So there's also the buba, which is the long loose blouse that comes to mid-thigh. It does seem like in men that it comes a little bit longer than mid-thigh, um, just to make it look more manly, I suppose. Um, then there's the fila, which is a cap, as you can see in the left picture. Um, the right picture, I believe, is, I can't remember if it's the Yoruba or the Igbo people, but they are not wearing a cap. Next, there's the Sokoto, which are the pants or the trousers, which you can see in both pictures. And then there's this also another cap called the Abitija. I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly. This is worn more in like fancy ceremonies or parties. So men will often wear this to like their wedding or again like a party. And then there's something called the agbada, which is the combination of a buba, sukoto, and sleeveless gown, which appears to be what the man is wearing in the left picture as well. Now we're going to talk about Nigerian waist bead history. So in the Girl Who Latin Boys, in the Latin Voice, excuse me, we have seen waist beads mentioned a few times, but I'm just going to explain them more in detail. So waist beads were made popular by the Yoruba people and can sometimes be known as the Yoruba beads. So waist beads actually have a ton of purposes. I listed the main purposes, but there are several others if you were to look it up, but these are just the main ones. So the first purpose is rite of passage. So whenever girls become older and reach adulthood, they'll often switch out old beads for new ones, as just a way of showing them growing up. However, girls are typically wearing waist beads from, as young as the age of like 2 or 3. So they're pretty much wearing them their entire life. Waist beads also are a sign of royalty. So women will use more valuable and rare beads to distinguish among themselves, to kind of say, hey, I'm rich, I can afford these beads, I guess. Um, Women also use these beads for weight tracking, however, weight tracking in a positive way, not in a negative way. So if their string of the waist bead sits farther above their hips, just rides up above their hips, that means that they want to lose weight. And then also, women will use like strings and strings of beads, like their entire like stomach will be just covered in waist beads, and they use this to shape their body, and I guess just give it more form, which is interesting. Along with these things, waist beads also represent fertility for many women. Most women in Nigeria believe that by wearing these beads, and specifically certain colors of beads, that this will make them more fertile to getting pregnant, which is interesting. Also, every color of waist bead has a different meaning and symbolism. I listed a few. Obviously, I couldn't list everyone because each color has a different meaning. But so brown means earth and stability, green is for prosperity and fertility, and then pink is for beauty and care. So I think that's really cool that each one has like a different meaning. So obviously we have, again, like I said, we have seen waist bead mentioned a few times in The Girl with the Latin Voice. And you probably have already thought of the passage wherever Aduni finds Rebecca's waist beads. So I'm just going to read that quote to you. It says, "Was it belonging to Rebecca? Was she from Agan village? And why did she take off her beads and hang it on the window metal gate? I confuse even more. All the girls that are wearing beads in the village don't be offing it from their waist. They wear it from when they are 3 years of age and don't ever off it. Rebecca," I whispered to the night air, "if you run away from your boyfriend, if you run away with your boyfriend, like Kofi says, why did you not take your beads with you? Why did you off it?" So here we're seeing this confusion from Aduni because, as I kind of said before, Nigerian girls are wearing waist beads from a super young age, and it's really rare for them to ever take them off. So it's pretty strange for Aduni to find Rebecca's waist beads not on her, and definitely sparked some serious curiosity in my mind as to why in the world Rebecca would leave her waist beads behind, especially if she ran off with her boyfriend. So now we're going to talk a little bit about traditional and historical Nigerian art. There's kind of three phases of Nigerian art, kind of like three categories. So I have the first two on this slide, and then I'm going to show you a video on the third one. So the first kind of category of Nigerian art is called Nok art, and this was around 500 BC to 200 AD. However, it was first discovered in 1928, so not that long ago actually. So Nok art is mainly made of terracotta, which is pretty much the oldest example. Nok art is the oldest example of terracotta known in Africa, which is really cool. It's pretty old, which is awesome. And so the typical style of Nok art are mostly heads featuring these flared nostrils, as you can kind of see in this picture above it. Small ears, triangular eyes, and buns. And again, typically Nok art is only heads. It's not anything other than like a head, or it's not like an animal or anything like that. The next area of art we have is Benin art, which is from 1440 to around 1827. Benin art was crafted for the Oba of Benin, which I guess is kind of like their king, or someone in like royalty or in power. And they made it specifically to display his supernatural nature, wealth, and influence. And the majority of these brass heads were to represent royal power, like I said. So Benin art was typically made of bronze, coral, and carved ivory. So super high quality material, obviously if it's going to be made for royals. And to make these heads, they had to know how to cast brass, which was considered to be one of the highest ranking forms of craft back in that day. So if you knew how to do it, you were pretty specialized. So now we're going to watch a video about the third form of art. And I'm just going to kind of let the video explain it because it'll do a better job than I will.
So far in this history of the world through things, we've encountered all kinds of objects, all eloquent, but not all particularly valuable or attractive. But today's object is, in any view, a great work of art. It's a head cast in brass. It's quite clearly the portrait of a person, but we don't know who. It's without question by a very great artist, but we don't know who. And it must have been made for a ceremony, but we don't know what. What is certain is that the head is African, it's royal, and it epitomizes the great medieval civilizations of West Africa of about 700 years ago. It was one of a group of heads discovered in 1938 in the grounds of a palace in Ife, Nigeria, and they astonished the world with their beauty. They were immediately recognized as supreme documents of a culture that had left no written record, and they embody the history of an African kingdom that was one of the most advanced and urbanized of its day. The sculptures of Ife exploded European notions of the history of art, and they forced Europeans to rethink Africa's place in the cultural history of the world. Today, they play a key part in how Africans read their own narrative.
A history of the world in 100 objects. Ife Head. A bronze statue from Nigeria, probably 15th century.
I'm in the Africa Gallery looking at the Ife head. Or rather, he is looking at me. His head's a little smaller than life size and made of brass which is now darkened with age. The shape of the face is an elegant oval, covered with finely incised vertical lines, but it's a facial scarring so perfectly symmetrical that it contains rather than disturbs the features. He wears a crown, a high beaded diadem with a striking vertical plume projecting from the top, and that's still got quite a lot of the original red paint. This is an object with extraordinary presence. The alert gaze, the high curve of the cheek, the lips parted as though about to speak, all these are captured with absolute confidence. To grasp the structure of a face like this is possible only after long training and meticulous observation. There's no doubt that this represents a real person, but this is reality not just rendered, but transformed. The details of the face have been generalized and abstracted to give an impression of repose. So it's perhaps not surprising that nearly all of the Ife metal sculptures that we know, and there are only about 30, are heads. In 1938, an astonishing group of 13, including the one now at the British Museum, was dug up in the precincts of a royal palace at Ife. The quality of the brass casting was superb, and there could be no doubt now that this was a totally African tradition. The Illustrated London News of April the 8th, 1939, published the find, and in an extraordinary article, the writer, still using the racist language of the 1930s, recognises that what he calls the Negro tradition, a word then associated with slavery and primitivism, must, with the Ife sculptures, now take its place in the canon of world art. Negro could never again be used in quite the same way.
One does not have to be a connoisseur or an expert to appreciate the beauty of their modelling, their virility, their reposeful realism, their dignity and their simplicity. No Greek or Roman sculpture of the best periods, not Cellini, not Udon, ever produced anything that made a more immediate appeal to the senses, or is more immediately satisfying to European ideas of proportion.
It's hard to exaggerate what a profound reversal of prejudice and hierarchy this represented. Along with Greece and Rome, Florence and Paris, now stood Nigeria. If you want an example of how things can change thought, then the impact of the Ife heads in 1939 are, I think, as good as you'll find. Current research suggests that the heads that we know were all made over quite a short stretch of time, possibly in the middle of the 14th century. At that point, Ife had already for centuries been a leading political, economic and spiritual centre. It was a world of forest farming dominated by cities that developed in the lands west of the Niger River. And it was river systems that connected Ife to the regional trade networks of West Africa and to the great routes that carried ivory and gold across the Sahara to the Mediterranean coast. In return came metals that would make the Ife heads. The world of the Mediterranean had provided not the artists, as Frobenius supposed, merely the raw materials.
All right, so now for my final question. So what are some examples of clothing and waist beads being a part of the storyline in The Girl with the Latin Voice? And also, how is the clothing and art in the city of Lagos different from what Aduni has experienced growing up? So I'm not going to go too much into this just because I want you guys to find this and answer for yourselves. But my answer for the first part of the question is Aduni is discovering Rebecca's waist beads she discovered her waist beads left behind in her living quarters. So we see this as part of the storyline because it shows that what Aduni was told about Rebecca and how she left is probably not true, just because of the strangeness of her leaving her waist beads, and also some other factors. Also, because Lagos is a much wealthier city, we see actually art and paintings hanging inside of people's homes, whereas in Aduni's town, we didn't really hear about, paintings being inside of people's homes, but now in this situation, we do. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you guys learned some stuff, and I'm interested to see your comments and answers to these questions. Here's my works cited, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.